the 464th Bomb Group, 15th U.S. Army Air Force. The target for the day were the oil refineries at Padu by Czechoslovakia. Our plane was a B-24 named Little Lulu. On the fuselage was a drawing of the comic strip character, Little Lulu, standing on a bomb. And there were 48 lollipops painted in front of her, indicating the number of combat missions the plane had flown over enemy territory. I was the radio operator and waist gunner. As we took off, I kept my hand on the very pistol, which was loaded with a double red flare. In case of trouble, that signal would clear the field for an emergency landing. Airborne at last, I could see the black line of darkness giving way to the dawn of a new day, which would be the last day on Earth for many of us. With 10,000 pounds of RDX, a heavy explosive, we headed for our target, climbing for altitude over the Adriatic Sea. As we reached the coast of Yugoslavia, we were at 20,000 feet. The flak was moderate to heavy at times, and we dropped tinfoil to foul up their radar. When we finally reached the oil refineries, we dropped our bomb load on the target and turned for home. Then a flight of Messerschmitt 109s attacked us. They came at us wingtip to wingtip. My gun was facing another B-24 as we were flying in a box formation of 10 planes. I looked over my shoulder and saw the flashes from the 109s. One flash cut the other waist gunner in two pieces, and another went right through my legs at the same time. The plane nosed over into a flat spin. Evidently another burst of shells exploded in the cockpit, killing the pilot and co-pilot, as there was no effort to bring the plane out of the spin. I laid on the floor as the centrifugal force kept me pinned down. I couldn't even lift my hand to get out the bay window, which was right over my head. Then I realized the two waist gunners were the only ones with parachutes on them, and the other gunner was dead. The ball turret was thrown out into space with the gunner still in it. I thought of my wife back home, and then I started to pray when all of a sudden I heard an explosion. I thought we were hitting the ground, but it was the oxygen cylinders exploding and the ammunition around me. Then, like a miracle, the plane broke in half right where I was laying. The force was off my body and I could move. I fell out. As soon as I cleared the tail section, I pulled my ripcord, and as my parachute opened, the front section of the plane had already hit the ground and flames were coming right up at me. I let the air out of the right side of my parachute so I would sideslip over the fire. Then the ground seemed to come right up at me, like a bullet at me. On impact, I broke a leg and hurt my back, but at least I was alive. The only one. It was like losing 9 brothers. I laid on the ground, unable to get on my feet to take up the slack and unbuckle my parachute harness. One of the Messerschmitts came down and circled the wreck, but I wasn't hidden under the smoke, and I don't think he saw me. Then the wind opened the chute and it was dragging me into a pond. Gee, I thought to myself, I wasn't shot in the plane, I wasn't burnt in the fire, I wasn't killed in the crash. Don't tell me I'm going to drown now. I finally got out of my parachute when I was up to my knees in water. I crawled back on my hands and knees to the field and started digging a hole with my hands to bury the parachute, when 2 farmers came over to me. "Revolver, revolver," cried one of them, as he pointed to my shoulder holster. I pulled out my .45 and discovered the clip holding the bullets was missing, so I gave them the gun. They carried me into a small farmhouse and laid me on a bed. The mayor of the small town in Czechoslovakia came into the room. He could speak some English, and he told me they would have to turn me over to the Germans. Must have been about 40 or 50 people staring at me, looking into the windows, and that is how I became a guest of Adolf Hitler. I drank a glass of goat's milk as I lay in the bed, and when I finished drinking the milk, a German captain came in and ordered his men to carry me out to a truck. The Czechoslovakian people were very friendly to me. Everywhere I went, they gave me the Viva Victory sign. The Germans finally put me in a small field hospital, and they put a plastic cast on my injured leg. Then I was placed in a ward with a dozen German soldiers who were wounded on the Russian front. As the nurse put out the light, I heard a voice with a German accent say, "Gentlemen, tonight we have an American with us." That's all he said. All night long I waited for one of them to come over and kill me. The next day one of them asked me if I was married, and I said yes. And he told me he had a wife and he had to go into his army and fight, or he would have been shot, and I probably had to go into my army and fight the same way. And after a couple of days, they were very kind to me. They offered me part of their rations, their schnapps, and a cigarette a day they'd share with me. And then I realized that they were just ordinary people, like myself, and how foolish wars really are. After a couple of days, they transferred me to the Luftwaffe Lazaret in Prague, Czechoslovakia, which was a big hospital. There I was to meet up with a dozen American flyers who were also shot down around the same time. They gave us a ward by ourselves, and the Swiss consulate managed to obtain American Red Cross food parcels for us. And there, some unbelievable things happened. We were able to buy the best pastry in town with the tobacco from our cigarette butts, and with all the rations in the boxes, we lived like kings. The German soldiers were really getting perturbed, because here we were prisoners and we were living a lot better than they were. So they finally decided to transfer us over to Frankfurt on the Main. Now they took us from Prague, Czechoslovakia, all the way across Germany in trains. And the train was in two sections. There were about half a dozen Americans in each section. When we got to Frankfurt on the Main, we had to wait for the second section to arrive, and a big crowd gathered around us. And there, a guy was in the center of a crowd hollering in German, and the people were all screaming, and he was pointing to us. And our guard went over, pulled out his Luger and held it to the guy's head, and mumbled something in German. Then he hollered at the crowd and they dispersed, and then he came over to me. He could speak English. And he said that guy's wife and kids were killed in an air raid last week, and he was telling the people we did it, and they were going to hang us up on the rafters in the railroad station. Boy, after that, every place that soldier went, I hopped right along with him with my crutches. Then we finally got into a group, and they brought us out to this asylum outside of Frankfurt. It looked like the people had war nerves there, or St. Vitus dance. They were all shaken, and they locked me up in the attic for a couple of days. They brought food up to me. But at nighttime, the RAF kept bombing Frankfurt. They must have leveled it, because it blew out all the windows in the place that we were staying in. We were a couple of miles from the center of town. There was a big chemical plant there, I think was their target. Then I was finally interrogated. This is about 3 or 4 weeks after I was shot down. Two very nice-looking, light blonde German officers came in. They were from the SS Corps in Africa, I believe. And they asked me my name, rank, and serial number, and I told them, and they asked me what group I was in, and I told them the 464th out of Italy, because I knew it was nothing new to them now. They knew the insignia on my plane and everything. So they didn't say anything, and the next day they come back, and they had a black folder, and inside of it was a copy of everything I've ever seen on my bulletin board back at our base. So they must have had a marvelous intelligence service thing. As a matter of fact, they even told me who the commanding officer was, because when the CO was shot down the same day I was, of the 776 bomb squadron. And they were pretty mad that they couldn't get any information from me, but I couldn't do anything about that. Then they put me in a freight train loaded with American prisoners, and we were assigned to a camp way up near the Polish corridor between Danzig and Stettin. And they we were crowded into these boxcars. Actually, they were the 49 cars in World War One, and they had a lot more than 40 people in these, though. We were practically standing up in them. And one night, we stopped outside the Berlin freight yards, and there was the biggest raid that I've ever been in. Our English planes, rather, and American planes were bombing Berlin, and there we were sitting in boxcars in the freight yards. And I'm telling you, that was a scary night. So we finally did get to the camp, and at the camp, I never realized how many planes we lost. I saw so many guys that I had been training with in the States. Guys I went to radio school, gunnery school, guys who were cadets with me. And there, as a matter of fact, this Stalag Luft number 4, there was 10,000 prisoners there. It was split into 4 compounds, 2,500 in each compound. And we stayed there, and we were there until the Russians cut us off. Oh, let's see, it was in February, I believe. And then we started that death march, 86-day death march between the Russian lines and the English lines. They put us out in barges on the Baltic Sea and took us around the Russian lines, and we started the march. And it was the worst part of the war. We went from one extreme to the other. In the camp it wasn't too bad, except that we didn't get too much to eat. But now we were on a forced march with the minimum amount of rations. Sometimes I'd get a slice of bread a day that was about 2 weeks old, or a potato. And we had no meat at all. And eventually we were all infested with lice because we had to stay in the same clothes for 86 days. No water to wash any part of our body. The only thing I think that saved us were the shots we took and the fact that the climate was cold. But we finally survived it. Some nights they put us into these big barns, and the nights we'd sleep in fields. And we'd march about 20 kilometers a day, back and forth. I believe we crossed the Elbe River 7 times, until finally the space between the English and the Russian front became so small that 2 English officers overtook us in an American Jeep, and then the guards surrendered, and that was May the 7th, I believe. We left a trail of slime and blood across Germany those 86 days, so horrible that conditions are really unbelievable. Sometimes, as we marched through towns, the German people would go by us in a bus and spit on us. And as we went to other towns, ladies would come up and hit me over the head with their handbag, and they thought we were the worst people in the world, which you really can't blame them, because they were the victims of our bombs. And that's why we kind of catered to the soldiers, because we knew as long as they had prisoners, they had a soft job, because it was either guarding us or going out to the Russian front. And they did give us protection as much as they could. Someday I think I'd like to go back, first to Italy to see the place where we were stationed, if I ever could find it again. And incidentally, I buried 6 cans of beer the day before we took off on that fatal mission. And they're probably still on the ground if they haven't rotted away by now in central Italy, at the Pantanella Air Base, about 30 miles south of Foggia, in fact. Then I'd like to go down and look at that Materno War Cemetery. It's 38 miles south of Rome. There they have my name on the chapel's interior wall. In fact, they're the names of all the missing in action, Army and Air Force and Navy men. And when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art full of him, and the Son of Man that thou visited him? Although he hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. That's inscribed on the wall.